question. I was going to ask a question, but I'm like, we're going to finish. Michael.
Hey, everybody out there. Welcome. This is my studio. I'm in North Carolina, about an hour from Asheville in the mountains. It's a cold, rainy mountain evening. I've been here for about 20 years, thereabouts. I came here as a resident artist at the Penland School, which is right up the road from my house here. So it's about 10 minutes away. And if you haven't heard of Penland School, it's a non-degree craft school featuring workshops by studio artists, mostly, predominantly. I became a resident artist, met my wife, and we settled in here in Bakersville. I've been, during that time, I guess for the last 20, 25 years maybe, I've been using a lot of brushwork in my on the surfaces of my pots, which are mostly functional pots, utilitarian pots. And over the years, I've found that my pots have become a really pretty basic. That's not the right word, but pretty straightforward plates, mugs, bowls. Those are my three mostly the forms I make. I have an example here, which is a little luncheon plate. Let's see if I can get this right. And it's painted with wax resist. It's got a little texture to the surface. I'm not sure if you can pick it up, but these are thrown on the wheel and then cut on the edge with a wire. Painted, fired in a soda kiln, a gas-fired soda kiln. And I was thinking about this the other day. Maybe we'll hit this topic tonight when we're speaking, but I'm interested in how I've kind of distilled my pots down to like 3 or 4 forms. I do make other pots, but I found myself in the last year, especially, kind of making really straightforward functional pots with a decorative kind of flair. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I was going to ask with that, with distilling down to the 3 pots, would you say, I have theories that sometimes we can see it and sometimes we can't, but there's always kind of the 3 things: the clay, the surface, and the form, and the fire, I guess. And there's always one that kind of comes out and becomes a focus. So in coming down into 3 forms, would you say that's to allow surface development?
Yeah, I think I do. Although this piece has some serrations in the surface, it's really a kind of a micro, subtle technique. I do tend to favor a surface that's not too eccentric. That has maybe the most eccentric thing about the surface or the form is a handle or a lid. Then something that interrupts the surface. I think that has had an effect. Being thinking about the surfaces of the pots, and I used to make pots that were very altered from the wheel, and that was a long time ago. And as I got more into brushwork, I think that's what's led me to that conclusion, to keep my forms pretty straightforward and simple. I know the word simple is like the word perfect, right? It's like, what's that mean? But I mean, like, just kind of spare, I guess, not too eccentric. Mm-hmm. Except, yeah.
So on that same note, Yoshi, when you mentioned changing clay bodies, have you found that changing your clay body has then altered what you want to do with it, where you're responding? Maybe you started with a new clay body doing very similar things that you were with porcelain, but then something shifted because of the material?
So the best thing about changing into porcelain to, gas firing to electric firing, electric kiln firing, is that I don't lose so much. When I was working with porcelain in Celadon, I lost a lot of pieces, and especially since I spend a lot of time carving, it was one of the huge frustration. But now I'm really enjoying the smaller kilns available, so I can just put it in there, a few pieces, and I can see the result immediately. So I don't know if I'm answering that the right question to answer to it, but I'm enjoying this transit of, like, used to be this clean white with blue or green tint, to this dark and dirty clay. So I'm enjoying that new challenge of like rediscovering my new personality almost in this new type of clay and firing even. I mean, technique is the same. I mean, I do enjoy carving part, but I'm quite excited about this transition right now.
Would you say that, you know, because your loss is less, that you, not to say you spent not, you know, like that you spend more time, or you almost have a little bit like you're putting a little more energy into it because you kind of know it's going to come back out, or that hasn't changed, you know, like, I don't know what I'm asking necessarily, but just that
No,
idea.
it's okay.
No, just that idea of, you know, I talk about it with in the wood firing all the time, where I am ready, like the whole kiln, I'm ready to lose it. I'm just kind of, and it's not that the pot, it's not that I don't love what's going in. So I'm wondering if that sensibility, or, you know, that you're able to like be more excited loading the kiln than maybe I am.
So the kiln is going on right now, actually. Like I had to start my kiln before I sat down here. But if I were still making this porcelain piece, and if I have to pack, even though the small gas kiln, it's just different feeling. Like I only could fire like maybe 3 times a year with my own work. But now, whenever I make stuff, then I can just select the small kiln to large kiln, whatever I make. So I kind of free up my opportunity to like experiment some stuff and see the result immediately instead of waiting for like 3 months, 4 months. So, I mean, I can kind of guess what it would be in my head already anyway, but still.
So we have a question from the audience. They're wondering if you've ever tried mid-range porcelains.
365 from that's standard. I have tried. Then it has a similar quality to it, but whenever we fire in electric kiln, it become kind of off-white, and I really like that cold, not gray, but that coldness of high fire. So for porcelain, I want to be true to the porcelain firing temperature, but low mid-range porcelain, like why I still have to call it porcelain. So that's when it was easy for me to change my clay body, because it doesn't need to be porcelain anymore. So I still have, like, I still make stuff with, so this is 365. So I'm playing with it, but I'm getting more excited about this.
Yeah.
Did I answer the question? Sorry.
So, Stephen, a question for you. This is from me.
Okay.
I was wondering, when you were talking about some of the political and social aspects that you're carving, that you think about with carving, and some of the things you're referencing with the smokestacks or the skeletons, they have a very timeless quality in terms of, it's been a problem for a long time. Has anything this last year, you know, with the protest movements and Black Lives Matter and like contemporary issues that are really, has that influenced, or have you thought about, I don't know, just some of the social issues that are really in front of us right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting question, because I do think about it a lot, and I just, as a cis hetero white guy, like I don't know if it's really my place to be making work talking about the Black Lives Movement. You know, like I just
And I use
I,
this as an example, but just protests in general,
sure.
or something that's a current social movement.
Yeah, and it is something that I think about a lot, and it does influence my work, whether it actually manifests in the imagery that I'm carving. My process is really elaborate, and it often takes sometimes months of working on an idea of how to try to begin to distill an idea from this bigger concept into imagery that makes sense on the pot. Because when I first started doing this work almost 15, 20 years ago now, like the work was really heavy handed, and it was kind of like there was a lot of text, and it was things that were kind of like hit you right over the head. And often people would say, like, okay, I get that you're saying, you know, I support this, or I'm, don't like that, or whatever. But it was, they kind of felt like as a one off, and people, they didn't have the sort of the universal message that I was hoping that they would have. So, for example, the the skull imagery became a way of talking about man's inhumanity to man and war and the way that we interact with each other and the kind of footprint that we leave on our planet without being just about one specific
Mhm.
conflict that's happening. It's not just genocide in Rwanda, but it's also about the mass graves in Kosovo and what's happening in you know Western China with the Uyghurs, and it's also about it's about a lot of these other things. So um and
Yeah.
I struggle with how to always make it universal. It's a challenge that I don't have an answer to, honestly, and I keep working through it. So I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Cool. So and this was a question that came up yesterday that I want to pose to you all. What who would you say has been most influential on your work? This can be, you know, it doesn't have to be another artist. It can be just it could be an experience, but what would you say has been something that's most influenced your work? Whoever wants to start this.
Whoever, are you asking who our influences are?
It can be an influence, it can be experience, just whatever, has most influenced your work. Or if there's something that comes to mind. So I don't want to limit you to naming other ceramic artists. It can
Sure.
be, it's open-ended is what I'm getting at.
Well, I can say, like, for me, my biggest interest is I'm at the end of the day a functional vessel maker. I believe in making work that people use. Part of what I want to have happen is I want this to happen. I want the intimacy of this object in your hand, you interacting with this, and hopefully that this is uh, inspiring some long-term dialogue between me, the maker, and you, the user. So in that capacity, like, I'm really interested in people who make traditional vessel, and Tom Turner was one of, like, the first people I was obsessed with as a young maker, because he was so clean and so precise and such a just consummate maker of forms. And my undergraduate professor was also a very tight functional vessel maker. Uh, so I was inspired by a lot of those people. But I, like, Richard Knockin is somebody I look to as a sort of inspiration of how to really do an amazing job of distilling an idea down to a visual image. And so he's somebody I look at a lot. Patty Warashina, she's a sculptor, but I still look at her work as somebody who's really able to articulate her ideas in a visual way. There's a lot of people that I look at, but I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to be a sculptor. I want to make pots. So, like, that's a huge part of my consideration. Um, so
And before Yoshi or Michael answer this, I just want to go back, and we've had some new participants show up. I want to make sure that everybody knows on the far right side, there's a Q&A. It might be different on an iPad, but there's definitely a Q&A option. So if you have questions that you would like to ask, please just click on that and type it in there. Yoshi or Michael, do you want to?
I can go. I can talk. So let me just mention two names. One will be Nick Joling. I got to know his work right after undergrad, and also Kristen Kiefer. I wish she was here today, but I'm having her pot. So yeah, those two artists always inspire me. Then I know their work and my work is different, but I always drawn into something that I cannot make. Those flamboyant, I mean, I shouldn't say flamboyant. That's not the description. It's very not loose. What is the word that I'm looking for? It's playful for Nick's work, and it's so elegant for Kristen's work. And the word elegance is always kind of stuck with me throughout the grad school and even now. And I want my work to be used, just like Steven said, but because of the carving and all the detail that I'm putting, my work tend to be like up on the cabinet or on a display, and I don't like that. When I go to my friend's house, I want to see my work in the sink. So I know those people use it, right? I mean, that morning or a week ago, whatever, when they did the dish. But I hate to say this, but I do own some mass-produced like IKEA plain plates and bowls and things like that. But I hope my work can coexist with those mass-produced items. That's then I always look at like why those pieces are created, designed, and like created. Like I always try to look at the functionality of like the cup, like the proportion and things like that, like how I can bring that universal design into my own work. So I look at not only the handmade object, but the mass-produced object that we supposed to hate, but I love those things. So that's my inspiration.
There are definitely some really well-made mass-produced objects. But there are a lot that it's easy to be like, oh, what's that?
I got a little judgy there for a second. It's like, what?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Nick and Kristen. They both make incredibly, like they're going to be in your sink all the time. Like they're such nice pots to use.
Totally. I was thinking when you first asked the question, I first go to, in my mind, like one of my major influences, although you wouldn't see it in my work, but a potter I took a workshop from in 1980 something, Michael Simon, who's a potter from Georgia. And mainly because I keep hearing his voice maybe, or I keep hearing things that he said or I remember, or I find myself in the studio working and thinking about him and his work as how he would approach his work. And it was only a 3-week workshop, but it really kind of imprinted on my making. And more recently, I'm thinking of a potter from Minnesota named David Swenson. His Instagram handle is Swenwares, and I see his work and his brushwork and his forms, and it just kind of blows my mind. And so that's a different kind of influence, I think, when you think about Michael Simon is not currently making any work, and David Swenson's a young potter who's making incredible work, in my opinion. So I think those are the people I would maybe mention as who occupy space in my subconscious, maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting, just because also one is a really kind of personal experience, and the other, have you met David before or handled his pots in person?
No.
Yeah, and the other is so distant. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
That those are the two you mentioned. So, and then I'm also just wondering, with this last year in COVID, has that had any kind of effect? Have you found, like for myself, I found that I am becoming really reflective with objects in my space that maybe I thought I was before, or with the morning coffee that I've always enjoyed. Now my enjoyment, it's like my focus on it has really become greater in a strange way. And it's made me rethink some of the maybe work from the past that I've made, and I'm just curious if COVID or the change in routine, the change in the ability to move as far from your own space. If you've noticed any shift in your work or ideas. This is another kind of just open question to anybody.
You know, I've been thinking about this, like we all have, I'm sure. I seek certainty, or I've been trying to seek certainty. I'm trying to seek a rhythm that's very different from my past, which was a very diverse experience day to day. You know, going up to Penland School and just kind of running into people and or whatever. But that's all kind of changed. And so I feel like this last year I've been focusing on finding a real steady rhythm in the studio. And ironically, it played out in the economic sense, thankfully, that I would just have an update on my web store every month. And that became really steady, and I really appreciated that steadiness. And usually I'm teaching workshops, I'm traveling, I'm doing shows. And during the summertime, there's a lot of folks who come to my studio from Penland School. So I really started appreciating the daily rituals maybe more than I have in the past. And also the steadiness in my studio. I felt like that was firing regularly and having online sales regularly gave me some peace and calm in a real chaotic kind of time, especially time that, one thing I will say though about the COVID in the past year, I feel like my work, I haven't taken a lot of risks with my work. I feel like kind of played the hits, you know, and didn't really explore too many things that might affect my direct income, I guess. So, I mean, I think I'm probably being hard on myself, but I think that I wish I had done more of this or more of that, but I've kind of steadily made pots, and it's a different kind of exploration, I think, because of the solitude, maybe.
Yeah, I can relate to some of what you're saying.
It's actually, for me, it's been sort of conversely like very weird because I accepted a full-time teaching position uh at in at the beginning of this academic year, and so I've spent this year teaching in person. I mean, masked, social distancing, but teaching in person, and which was a little bit different than what I was doing before, which was kind of working in a small community space and not having a lot of interaction with people on a daily basis. So I was making work, and I would teach like a class once a week or something like that for the community, but I'm now actively engaging with young artists and sort of navigating this pandemic in a really sort of immediate way that has somewhat changed the way I look at making work and the way that, like, what my role is and my responsibility, because I'm dealing with not only my own self, but also like dealing with the anxieties of students and how they're sort of functioning and living life, and trying to be present and available for them, and as sort of as a sounding board at times for their own kind of like well-being, which is a different consideration than I had when I was just making pots. So like there's this new component to my life that wasn't there a year ago. So it's been rewarding, but it's also at times like it's a whole different ball game too. So
I would say too, just the first year of teaching, even though you're not a first year teacher, the first year teaching anywhere is also kind of just like getting your bearings, and can often be, people say it's the most stressful year of teaching, right? And so to add that into that mix, I can imagine that you're like really tired when you go home.
it's a long day some days. Yeah. I mean, it's also, just having to be tested all the time. And I mean, I don't want to get off on all the COVID stuff, but it's.
So there are testing requirements as a
Oh,
teacher?
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah. I
wow.
have to get tested. I have to be tested once a month minimum. And I did get COVID last year. So,
Wow.
so um, thankfully it wasn't a severe case, but I did get COVID. So, and I don't, you know, it was it's been interesting. I don't want to because we could go down a huge rabbit hole with that. So I'd rather talk about pots.
How about you, Yoshi? Because
Well, I have home studio. I live in a small downtown apartment. So when lockdown happened, I could not have access to my own studio at Baltimore Clayworks. So I ended up dragging my wheel back into my third floor, this little tiny staircase. I move it into my kitchen. The wheel became the kitchen appliance. And first couple months, I just could not touch wheel clay at all. I got really depressed. But one point, like, I have to do this. So like next 2 months or so, I was just cranking like in the morning to night. I mean, all I have to do is go to the kitchen, right? It's too close. So I was just making a lot of stuff. Then after that 2 month happened, I just kind of like exhausted, like, why am I doing this? There's no end of the tunnel back in like what? July or something. Then entire summer, I did not touch clay at all. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I learned a lot about Japanese history and some random stuff, not clay related stuff that I did. I was playing violin and like all kind of stuff, like some random stuff that I did, just not to touch clay. But we're like so connected to social media, right? Like Facebook and Instagram, and there are so many artists who's making wonderful work, just like nothing is happening. And that put me into the huge pressure, like I have to make more work, but I don't have this energy or desire to do that. But I was just keep on saying like, it will be okay. I can do this, but not right now. But just to make myself feeling okay about not touching the clay was really difficult. But again, with this invitation to be part of this, that kind of got me excited again. So I was making more work. So like, I want to make happy pot. I don't want to make something sad pot. And whenever I don't feel right, I always make mistakes like carve through and like crush it or like holding it too tight. Whenever I carve, like I always talk to myself, and depends on like my mood. Like sometimes I just be happy and forget about everything, but sometimes like complaining about what's going on. And I like sometimes that chip on the rim, like something bad happens. So it is okay to have on and off. And this almost a year now, right? It's hard to believe, but I definitely had some off more than on. But in a retrospect, I feel okay about it.
Yeah.
I bought another wheel. That's plus. Little tiny simple Aspire. You know the little tiny portable one? I end up buying it. So there's no excuse of not working. I mean, I hate to turn my kitchen into pottery studio, but anyway. So that's what I went through during this COVID.
Well, and I think there's also, even though you're not working, it's not like you're not thinking. I feel like in pauses, whether planned or not, when you come back to the other side of whatever was the reason for that, the new stuff comes out of it. I mean, there's kind of like, we're all influenced by our environment and our mood, like you're saying. So I think whether you realize it or not, it's probably influencing or will influence down the road something. So on that same thought, when we were talking about your patterns, Stephen really got into some of the ideas behind his. I was wondering, Michael and Yoshi, if you all could talk more specifically about the origin of some of, what is inspired the pattern specifically, or how you kind of take what you're inspired by and then how you change it to make it yours.
I think my pattern is kind of based on a sort of general feeling of or natural ecstasy or visual ecstasy, I guess, of looking at the beauty of pattern in nature. Although I found that it's very stylized what I'm doing. I sort of tend to look for a way to recreate some sort of visual ecstasy, I guess, in the surface. So I work really hard on trying to tweak the form, the surfaces with wax resist and the soda firing. I spend that time thinking about the complexity of nature, like looking at, like this time of the year, we have these bare trees and they're very complex if you look at them. And I don't necessarily paint patterns from nature in that way, but I do find that that's the motifs, I guess, I'm using, or sort of stylizations of that when I'm looking at. I also do some work that I won't have for the show coming up this week. Maybe a few pieces, but I've been working with a inlay process, which it also incorporates stylized natural patterns. My dog's barking outside. I don't know if you can hear it. What's that? Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've been doing it for a very long time, and I take comfort in the familiarity of those form surface forms. But I think if I remember early on trying to paint a branch tree outside the window of the studio, and I remember painting it, just trying to precisely paint the pattern of the branch and the leaves. And I think I did maybe 2 or 3 of those pieces, and then that was it. And I realized what I was really more interested in was the kind of overall feeling or pattern and surface of the piece.
You have like a great view from your studio, like the front stoop is amazing. The view from there is awesome. So
yeah, I'm surrounded by, I sort of forget what, I do walk around, obviously checking my chickens and walking up the road on a nice day. And I do have that kind of visual stimulation, all around me, basically. Excuse me.
yeah.
Well, I look at fabric design and like a wrapping paper, origami paper, like so like a traditional like Japanese or Asian patterns, I guess, mostly. But I extend my inspiration to like as random as like some advertisement or tattoo even. Trying to get some information in the patterns and trying to overlap with each other, like quilting is what I'm trying to do from here on. I'm still in the process of like collecting all the patterns right now. When I went to Dubai, I got to see a lot of mosques, then different architectures, and those people, that culture is very unique in that design communicating through those patterns. They don't, as a religion, they don't use like a statue of Muhammad, or, unlike Jesus in Christianity or Mary or whatever. Like, it's just a different way of, God, what is the word that I'm looking for? It was just exciting to see. That I could see a lot of patterns when I was there for 2.5 years. Then that allowed me to have another patterns in my vocabulary. So from Japan to US, and now I went to Middle East and came back. So I'm kind of like all the hybrids. And I think that's what I'm trying to be on, to represent through my artwork. So I kind of wander off again, I'm sorry. But the patterns, the inspiration is coming from everywhere, but mostly coming from the fabric and the paper that I've always looked at as I grew up.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of you talking. I can't help but think about when Stephen was talking about the universality of what, I feel like in a lot of ways, I can even relate all 3 of what you all are saying, and the idea of kind of the macro effect that's happening within those visual elements, which is kind of interesting. Do you all have any questions for each other, or?
I just wish we were all together. That was the one thing, you know, I miss one of the best things about Southern Crossings for me as I mean, part of the reason why those of us who sort of founded it was about bringing the best people around to hang out and talk and be able to have these kinds of long conversations in a really organic way. And I miss that. So I love seeing your all faces, and so that I appreciate that. So.
Steven, I knew your work when you were in grad school. You're like superstar during that time. You still are, definitely. But I did not believe that you're carving.
I know a lot of people
I
don't.
thought I thought it's cast, and I'm glad that from your mouth you said you draw and carve. So I'm
Yeah, it's
happy
actually
that
like
you
one of
actually
the no, well, thank you. I never thought of myself as a superstar, but like uh yeah, it's actually one of the biggest things that people who are familiar with my work but don't know me per se often think that my work is slipcast and that it's like some kind of stamp or a transfer of some kind.
Yeah.
And I'm just that uh, sort of anal retentive, for lack of a better term, because I'm it's super tight, and I spend a lot of time after my carving, sort of eliminating the mark of my hand so that because I want it to feel like it was just there. You know, I don't want necessarily there to be a lot of indication that I was the one making those marks. I mean, obviously, I am interested in people knowing that I made it. It's important that people understand that, but I can't leave it. Like I remember one of the funniest experiences I ever had is I was teaching years ago, and Andrew Cho, who was he was a grad student of mine at the time. He was sort of like laughing at me because he was like, "You're so tight. Everything you make is so controlled." And he was like, "Can you make a loose pot?" And so I was like, "Sure." And I sat down and tried to make this loose pot. And it basically was like I made this really like tight pot and then tried to knock it off center. And he was like, he's like, "That's not how you make a loose pot." And I was like, "I know, I can't make a loose pot. It's like not in my, it's not in my DNA, you know?" So I mean, I love people who could do that, but that's not what I do. So I'm
So just for some of the participants that might not know carving, so are you carving on wet clay? Is your clay bone dry? Are you wearing a mask while you're carving because of the dust? And then like ergonomically, I am curious, just like holding something, in the light, what is some of the process? You don't have to get too heavy into it, but just
sure. No, it's a kind of so I start out when the piece is, I'm going to steal, since I'm standing in for Kristen tonight, I'm going to steal one of her terms. She talks about this term called uh, velvet, which is like the stage right before leather hard. So that's that stage where the clay still has a little bit of moisture and it's not quite leather hard, is when I use an old ballpoint pen that doesn't work anymore and I draw all of the imagery on the pot. And then I start carving. And depending on the scale of the piece, like just to reference back to this cup that I showed before, like this is probably about 3.5 to 4 hours of carving from start to finish, from the starting of the drawing all the way to the end. Like the skull imagery is sometimes, depending on the scale of the small vessels, like sometimes as much as 6 hours. And then if I'm talking about like a large scale jar or some object like a vase form or whatever, it may be 30, 40, 50, 60 hours of carving time. So I'll often like rehydrate, spray the piece down, and then, keep it. And I have multiple damp boxes that I'll put pots back in to keep them from drying too much. But at the end, I'll be, because I use a very smooth porcelain. I can actually carve it when it's completely bone dry. I just have to be extra careful, which slows down how much carving I can do without, because there's no fixing it. Once it's bone dry, if I make a mistake, that's the mistake is there, and I just have to figure out a way to incorporate it or discard the whole piece. And if you're like 40 hours into a carving, you don't want to discard a piece that so I actually, somebody, I saw a little question. I throw the pieces just a little bit thicker than I would normally throw them if I was just making a straight up utilitarian object, just so that I can have a little bit of, so I can get that relief. Like, I'm really interested in this tactile experience that can happen with you as the maker, that you can feel this variation and
Mhm. So when are you holding it pretty close to your face and carving, or do you have it resting on a table? You're not, I'm imagining like a tense because you're wanting to keep everything stable, but it's probably not in
it,
reality.
it's like
Do you have
about
to think?
the distance you would hold a book, maybe.
And you can do
I
all 3 hours like in one go?
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was in
Oh,
graduate school, I would carve for 15 hours in a row. I
wow.
I started to develop like a palsy because like I'm holding this tool like this for so long that, like, when I was in graduate school, I would put the tool down and my hand would be doing this. So like I learned that I had to be like really conscious about like the fatigue that I was doing to my body. So I don't work, like, I mean, I'm not in
Yeah.
graduate school
Yeah.
anymore, so like I break it up. So I may carve for 6 hours in a day, but I will try to do other things so that I'm not just carving for 6 hours straight anymore. It's a little, I mean, if I'm getting ready for a show, maybe I will, but I try not to do that all at once. It's really exhausting. It's not great for my body, you know. I'm
So
also having to do this now that I didn't have to do, like this is a new addition in the last couple years.
I know
From,
I heard
from,
42
from
is like the magic age of glasses. Like when people go turn 42, all of a sudden readers, that's like part of it.
that's what, I don't know if Michael, when you got yours, but I was 45 when I got mine, and I had been preparing for an exhibition, and I was carving all day for like 3 weeks straight. And one day I was carving and I looked up and I looked back down and I couldn't focus. Like, I could not make my eyes focus. And I was kind of like, oh, something just happened. And so I went to the doctor and they're like, yeah, you have, like, you need to take care of your eyes a little bit better. They're like, you're at that age now. So I have glasses for close work and looking at computers. And
So I just want to say, Michael, you're muted. But also, we're coming up on the hour right now. So for everyone that's here participating and our panelists, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your questions and your energy. I also want to remind everyone that Southern Crossings is March 5th through the 7th. And the way that we have the website set up is you can come to sxpf.org, and each artist will have their name and a link to their shop. So everyone can be found on our page. You don't have to go from artist to artist. You can always come back to our homepage and then link to someone else and look at their shop that way. Also, just want to remind everyone that we do have blessings and a backpack raffle currently going. So if you thought you were like, oh yeah, I meant to buy some raffle tickets for that, they're $5 each, and there's so many pots. I mean, it's beyond going to blessings in a backpack, which is a really good cause. It's also great value. So you're essentially instant collector if you win. Does anybody in the audience? Yeah, we have someone saying thank you to the interviewers, that it's been great. Yeah, does anybody here have any last words they would like to? Otherwise, I think we can call it a night. Is everybody feeling good?
It's good to see you guys.
Absolutely. Uh, I'm looking forward to the day where we can all be hanging out again in person. So,
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, bye.
Thank
bye.
you so much.
Good night, everybody.